Hey, Pro-Life Jen, it's Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to this new episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. Today, we're going to talk about abolitionism and whether or not are you an abolitionist or just a plain old pro-lifer. I would always call myself an abolitionist because I'm a fan and student of history. But there are some people who call themselves abolitionists who hate other pro-lifers and really, really hate us. So I think we need to talk about that, and we're gonna delve right into it. Yay! More people that are mean to us, who are supposed to be on our side. So we're gonna invite a blogger on today. I'm so excited to have Samuel Sey. He's a Ghanaian Canadian who lives in Brampton, a city just outside of Toronto. He's a member of Grace Fellowship Church, a community liaison at the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Samuel writes on his blog, Slow to Write, where he talks about racial, cultural, political issues, along with biblical theology and politics. So I'm sure everyone loves everything you ever write, Samuel, and you're super popular in Canada.
No, I'm not the most liked person in Canada or America or Ghana for the matter, where I was born.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about just easy stuff like race, politics, biblical theology,
Yeah.
super easy. Probably a pretty fun person to go out to dinner with, though, I would assume. Well, at least in my book.
I would hope so. I like to eat. I like to eat very well. So, but I'm guessing you don't mean that. No, you mean no. I'm kidding. No. Yeah. I like to have. I write about things that I care about, and I care
Mm,
about things that I think about. So,
mm,
a lot of these things, the political, cultural, racial issues, I think about them. I care about them, and I know a lot of
mm.
people care about them too. So that's why I write about them. Although they're not very popular to write about many times, I care about them. So I want to help people who care about them too.
That's awesome. And I'm so glad to see you doing that, especially up there in Canada where
Well,
having some
so
speech isn't always very popular.
so
Um,
well, that's true. But there's
uh,
actually a bit of an update to that. I
yeah.
actually just recently moved from Toronto to Ohio.
Well,
Uh,
congratulations. Welcome to the land of the free.
at least for now, right? Uh, but yes, I married my then fiance who lived in Ohio, so I ended up moving to Ohio to the U.S. So
Well,
yeah.
we're very glad to receive you into the United States of America, where we can write freely. No, so I want to talk about this blog you had up on Slow to Write about why you're not an abolitionist. I thought it was, you really got into a lot of different issues. I think it's a good discussion to have this discussion about your label of abolitionist versus normal, just run of the mill pro lifer trying to save babies.
Right.
But I do want to start off by asking just the basic question of why are you pro life? How did you get into the pro life movement? You're speaking at Created Equal here in a couple of weeks, so
Yeah.
you're going to be kind of on the pro life speaker circuit, I assume.
Yeah.
So how did you get into this movement?
Yeah, man. It really started when I became a Christian when I was 19.
Hmm.
And when I became a Christian, at my church, at my local church, they had an opportunity for people to come and share their testimony of how they became Christians and what God has saved them from. And I went up there, I
Hmm.
shared my testimony of how God had saved me and everything. And then one of my dear friends went up to, the church just to share what God has saved her from. And she mentioned that many years ago, a few years before that, she had an abortion, and that shocked me because I remembered that one night she had called me and she had asked me, Sam, what would you say to a girl considering an abortion? And I said, at the time I was not a Christian, I said, I don't know, I didn't care about anything. Um, and I, in her testimony, and as I spoke to her after that testimony, I didn't know that was the most important question I had been asked in my life at that point. She was asking me that question because she was pregnant, and it was a bit of a cry for help. her boyfriend and my friend at the time was pressuring her into getting an abortion. So unfortunately, a few days after I said I don't know, she got an abortion, and her baby was killed. So when I heard her sharing that, it broke my heart, and I was like, man, I need to know how to help people. I need to know what to say to women who are considering abortions. So a few years ago, I ended up joining CCBR, which is in Canada, the Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform, which is somewhat of the Canadian version of Center for Bioethical Reform, with Greg Cunningham, I believe in California is where he's at, I think. Um, so I joined the movement there. I became an intern, a summer intern, and I was doing activism. And by the grace of God, I was able to help 73 women become pro-life who were originally pro-abortion. And then I joined the staff eventually, and I only left because I was moving to Ohio to be with my love, my wife. So but yeah, that's how I became pro life. That's how I joined the pro life movement.
That's so awesome to see how you took that really, I would say, devastating news to find out that she had called you, but then took it and put it into action. I think, and now you say, just of the children of 73 children that were spared the violence of abortion because you took action. I think that's absolutely incredible, and it's a great, I think, testimony to everyone who listens and watches these podcasts, to know that every single person, no matter what your background, your experience, you can get active and you can save lives. And no matter how ill-equipped you may feel at the time, you have the power to do something great. So I think that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I think we hear about this a lot. When I wrote my book years and years ago, we had interviewed young pro-life students who had chosen abortion, who had chosen adoption, who had helped a friend either have an abortion or helped a friend choose life. Just interviewed young people kind of within the pro-life movement and their personal experiences with abortion. And I'll never forget, we interviewed a young girl. We did a whole chapter on Andrea, who's in Missouri, who became pregnant. And when we were interviewing her for the book chapter, she talked about how she had called, when she found she was pregnant, she called 9 friends in one night, asking them what she should do. And the first 8 friends told her to have an abortion. And it was the last friend who finally said, you don't have to do this, right? And that's what led Andrea to choose life. And it was interesting, because when we were interviewing her, I was like, did you realize at the time you were simply calling around trying to find a yes? You were trying to find a yes. And I think that is what gets left out a lot when you talk to pro-choice men and women, and they're like, well, I don't like abortion, but I would never, tell a woman she couldn't have an abortion. Yeah, you really should tell her she doesn't have to choose abortion, that there are other nonviolent alternatives, and that we really do stand with her. Like, just saying, I don't think you should do this can save a life.
Yeah, I you know when I became an intern, I I didn't know much as to how to talk to women whatsoever on this issue, or men on this issue, or
Mm-hmm.
anybody on this issue. I was very ill equipped to do so. So I remember that summer, I was going to be learning apologetics on the pro life issue on abortion. So I just wrote down that, man, since I wasn't able to help out my friend from all those years ago, if I could just save one person,
Mm-hmm.
if I could be able to save one baby, if I could be able to convince one person to become pro life, I'd be grateful. But then I thought, if I'm going to be doing this the whole summer, if I'm going to have about 90 days to do this, maybe if I could just change 30 minds, that would be great. So I just wrote that down. I made a goal. If I could change 30 minds in abortion, I'd be very, very grateful. Like I said, that summer it became 73, and it's become more than 73 since then. But I'm an average person. I just learned apologetics on the abortion issue, just within a week or two span. and then just knowing and reading and thinking about the answers that people are giving me when it comes to the abortion issue, like anybody can, I was able to just say, hey, well, let's talk about the science. Let's talk about what it means to support human rights. And and you'd be surprised when you talk to people, when you challenge them. You'd be surprised how many of them you will realize I have not really thought this through at all.
Mhm.
And then you can help, anybody can, like I have been able to help change minds in abortion.
Yeah, it's surprising that you have an opinion on abortion because aren't you a man?
Yes, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I would say a lot, when I do pro life activism, is that people will say, yeah, you're a man, how can you speak on the abortion issue? And then I will say, well, do you hate racism? And they will say, well, of course I do. And I said, well, if a cop wanted to come and shoot me right in the face, would you defend me? And they would say, well, yeah. I'm like, well, but you're not black. And then they will get the point here. It doesn't matter who you are. If you hate injustice, you hate injustice.
That's a great point. I think we should all remember that next time or I guess any man listening should remember that next time they're accused of having an opinion about something they're not supposed to have an opinion about. But you're allowed to have an opinion here on abortion if you're a man, if it's pro-abortion, and you're allowed to dress up as Handmaid's Tale's outfit. But if you're a pro-life man at a protest, God help you with the pro-aborts there. So, all right, let's get into this abolitionism, pro-life thing. It's fun to have people who are on your side hate you, not. But it is become, and I think we see this within social movements. It's not just within the pro life movement where there's deep disagreements about strategy and people who will argue about tactics. For example, Greg Cunningham, who you mentioned earlier before, I think pretty much hates me. And actually tried to take the trademark of Students for Life at one point, disagrees with me about some strategy. So I think there are disagreements within the pro-life movement, and some of those disagreements are very real. Some of them are superficial. It's hurt feelings from 25 years ago and things like that. But this abolitionism, this is something that we've seen at Students for Life kind of come up in the last few years where, we'll have a student, we'll be working with a student, and then they'll be like, well, wait a minute, I can't support this piece of legislation. I can't work with you any longer because this bill will only save 99% of all children in the state. And therefore, I hate this bill, and I'm going to tell everybody I know to vote against it. And you're like, wait, what? You're like this. If this bill gets passed and becomes a law, 99% of all children who would die from abortion would not die from abortion. But you're going to help those who support abortion kill this bill over that. And they're like, "Yep." And that's what God would tell me to do. So can you explain, maybe in a more reasonable way, me getting angry, the difference between like what is this new abolitionism definition? Because like I said at the beginning, I've always considered myself an abortion abolitionist. Like, duh, that's our goal, is to abolish abortion, to make abortion unavailable and unthinkable. Twofold goal in the pro-life movement. But now it's like, no, you're not an quote unquote abolitionist if you believe, or support or advocate for or tell a legislator to vote for legislation that doesn't 100% end all abortions immediately, even though there is no chance that that law would actually go into effect.
Yeah. Yeah. So abolitionism is, at least this version of abolitionism, is about a decade old, maybe a little bit over than that, but it's about 10 years old. Mostly, I'm a Christian, but particularly abolitionism is coming from primarily anti-abortion Christians who believe in centralizing the gospel in pro-life advocacy or anti-abortion advocacy, as in that we should be preaching the gospel at all times whenever we're doing pro or anti-abortion work. I'm saying that, I'm not saying pro-life because they wouldn't call it pro-life, they would say anti-abortion. But
Which
so
I'm totally
that,
fine with the title anti-abortion. I say that all the time. I actually think it's
absolutely,
more
yeah.
direct because, you have people like Wendy Davis and Gavin Newsom who tried to claim that they're pro-life. So I'm totally fine with saying I'm anti-abortion.
Yeah,
Can you be a
absolutely.
Catholic and be an abolitionist according to them?
No, you can't. Yeah. So I think so. Yeah. So abolitionism means that you centralize the gospel, and then especially they're known for being immediatist. So abolitionism, when people usually mention it, at least in the pro-life aspect, they really mean the immediatist view, which is that the incrementalist view, as you've mentioned before, the incrementalist view of taking whatever you can get in terms of being able to push whatever law you can, even though it won't be perfect. A law that will save some babies, they think, is wrong. They think that it would, by nature, in their minds, it would sanction some abortions. So, for example, the heartbeat bills, they would say that it might save some people, but they would say that does the ends justify the means? Is it really okay in their minds or in their words to sanction the murder of some babies, even if you save some babies? That's really their argument. So they believe that you should be an immediatist and that you should immediately call for all abortions to end with zero exceptions. And not just that, a very key part, not just that, is that to be truly immediatist, to truly want a truly anti-abortion bill, not only does it have to end all abortions with zero exceptions, which of course every truly pro-life person agrees that should be the goal, but also where there's strong disagreement on, where though I'm pro-life, many pro-life people disagree on me with this, but they would say that a truly good anti-abortion bill has to criminalize abortion, which would also then penalize anybody, including the abortive women, the abortionist, or anyone who facilitates an abortion, that they would want them to be penalized as well with murder charges.
Interesting. Do they compare themselves to like William Wilberforce?
Yes, they absolutely do. They say that.
But he was
Yeah, they
he
say
was
that.
incrementalist.
Yeah. Now I completely agree with that. That's an argument that I
Can you explain
suggest.
that so everyone who's like, who the heck is William Wilberforce? Sorry.
Yeah, So Wilberforce was a Christian politician in the UK in the 18th and 19th century, which would be the 1700s and the 1800s. And when he became a Christian, he was very passionate about sin or against sin and against injustice, especially slave trade or slavery as a whole. So what he wanted to do was to ban slavery as a whole in the British Empire. But he started off incrementally, as in gradually, banning or pushing bills to ban the slave trade. But
Yeah.
before that even passed, he would support bills to limit the number of slaves that could be on ships. He would support bills that would limit the number of slaves that could be sold at shipping ports before he could finally end the slave trade. Now, abolitionists claim that he was an abolitionist because he wanted to immediately end the slave trade. Well, yes, he wanted to immediately end the slave trade, but that's not all he wanted to do. He wanted to ban slavery as a whole, but he knew it was impossible at the time to ban slavery as a whole without first banning the slave trade.
Well, I mean, there's so many. I mean, I was just thinking of the slave ships that were coming into the ports there in the UK. Like, if you're an abolitionist then, and you know there is like a slave ship that's getting ready to go to the Americas, if you're kind of going along with the logic of what you're saying these anti-abortion abolitionists are doing, you would say either you can go into the slave ship, and if you can't rescue every single person from that slave ship, then what, you like blow up the ship, or you just let the ship go to the Americas? Because if you can't rescue them all, why try?
Yeah, that's a question that when they're asked, oftentimes they would just repeat what I said before, is that, well, the ends do not justify the means. And look, I understand. I mean, no one is supposed to be satisfied with incremental bills. That's the whole point of it being incremental. It's called incrementals because you're trying to gradually get to where you want.
Yeah.
So
Right.
no one should be satisfied
Right.
by these bills. We can rejoice.
Yeah.
We can rejoice that we are progressing and
Mm-hmm.
saving preborn babies. The same way that Wilberforce, he did not want to simply end the slave trade. He didn't simply want to say, "Hey, you can't sell the trade, but it's okay to keep the trade." That's not what he wanted. He wanted to say, "No, you can't sell people. Sorry, trades. You can't sell slaves nor keep the slaves." But he did not. He wanted to ban all slavery, but he still rejoiced when the slave trade ended
Mm-hmm.
because then finally one major part was finished. Now he could move on to focusing on banning the slave trade, banning slavery as a whole, which is what we want. What we want is we're going to rejoice when, unfortunately, we can save babies who are past 7-8 weeks, right, with the heartbeat bills, or even before that with 3 or 4 weeks. But we also then want to work then after we pass some of these bills to attempt to save babies, all babies, with zero exceptions. But unfortunately, our abolitionist friends, and I will call them friends, but they wouldn't call us friends. They would call us enemies, many of them anyways, because they believe that we are just as bad as, unfortunately, the abortion advocates. And some of them really do say, in fact, some of them say that we are even worse
Yeah.
than the abortion advocates.
Yeah.
So it is an argument that I struggle with because especially from Canada, right? In Canada, we have zero laws on abortion. It's. I mean, theoretically, you can kill a mother can kill their baby the very day before they're born in Canada. It is legal as it is in New York, but again, it's nationwide. Only two nations have zero laws on abortion: Canada and North Korea. Now, here's a question that I ask abolitionists, and they can't answer. Or oftentimes, they will just try to, move on from the question, which is that in Canada, only 14% of the population is completely and truly pro-life. Only 14%. However, 90% support a bill that would ban some abortions, that would ban at least late-term abortion. So is it really wrong or immoral for me to say, you know what, 14% means that for us to pass a bill that would end all abortions is impossible right now. But until we can do that, we can at least save thousands of babies in Canada who suffer late-term abortions. Is that immoral? Is that wrong? Is that a bad strategy? Of course not. But in their mind, they say all or nothing.
And didn't you write in your blog about how back in the 80s when Canada was debating and there was an opportunity to pass a pro-life law, it was this kind of mentality of all or nothing that killed like your only chance of a pro-life law from passing?
Absolutely. It was actually a tie in the Senate. I'm forgetting exactly. I think it was like 130 votes versus 130 votes. It was a tie that killed the bill, and that happened because a lot of similar people to the abolitionists,
Yeah.
they want a bit of all or nothing, and
That happened here in
believing
America
that.
too in the 80s, just so you know.
Oh, interesting. I need to know more
Yeah,
about
there
that.
was a human life bill and a human life amendment because President Reagan, who became pro-life after he signed the therapeutic abortion law when he's governor of California, the only sitting president to write a pro-life book, had wanted to move quickly on fixing the wrong of Roe versus Wade, and there was a fight over an amendment, which is harder to pass, but it would be permanent, versus a bill that could be reversed, and the pro-life movement split itself, and nothing passed.
Wow, wow. I need to know more about that because I know about, of course, the Canadian context, or when it comes to this history, but I'm not aware of that happening in America.
Yeah. It's sad because I didn't know about the Canadian situation because it was in 1989, right, in Canada, I think.
It was 89 to 91.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the bill didn't pass. You didn't have any pro-life protections.
No, no, and because of that, I mean, it was a moderate, conservative at the time who passed the bill. So he wasn't really all that strongly pro-life or all that strongly conservative, but he pushed the bill because he knew that a lot of Canadians wanted to. So he pushed a bill that wasn't, of course, ideal,
Yeah.
but it would have saved some babies. So when that didn't pass, well, every conservative then who came on to become the prime minister said, well, if that bill didn't pass, why do I want why do I want to shame of trying to pass a
Yeah.
bill,
It,
which will be controversial
yeah.
already in Canada.
Yep. That actually
Yeah,
happened here in America too. Ugh. It gives like the lazy politicians an excuse not to act. That's exactly what happened in the fight. This was like 84, 85 when this happened here in America. This would have made abortion illegal. And there were politicians at the time who just one just recently passed away, who were like, after that they were like, yeah, I never want anything to do with the pro-life movement ever again, because they were called pro-abortion because they supported the bill and not the amendment. And so it gives politicians the excuse not to do anything. What I mean, do you see like, I see the benefit, like especially now when we're facing a post Roe era and we're looking at the polling numbers, and especially if you look at like the early 90s and the polling numbers on abortion in America versus where they are now, like I could definitely point to incremental laws and discussions about partial birth abortion, discussions about pain capable children, those incremental laws, those discussions, I believe, have severely impacted for the better the view of abortion. Really showing Americans the violence and the gruesomeness of abortion. Can you, like, what do you think about, can you see that there's, merit in these incremental approaches versus the all or nothing?
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, ideally, we all should want to ban all abortion with zero exceptions. But absolutely, while I am unsatisfied with all these bills, I still celebrate because I see that again, babies are being saved by it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the Hyde Amendment,
Yeah,
for
that's right.
example, I think it was the Charlotte Lozier Institute that mentioned that it saved about almost 3 million babies. And I'm happy there are 3 million more babies in America now than there would be without that
Yeah.
bill. And if you ask, I think Cunningham has asked some abolitionists, would you want to ban this bill then, right? If you believe this bill is immoral, should it be banned, right? Do you wish it never happened? They can't answer that because then if they answer it, they're gonna have to admit that, yeah, we're saying it'd be better if 3 million people were not born.
Mm,
Now, of course, abolitionists really do not believe that, right?
mm,
They want people to be born, right? They are truly anti-abortion. The problem is their ideology suggests it is truly better if it's nothing instead of some people being saved. To be honest, it's attractive because no one should be satisfied with incremental bills, right? No one should be. There's a lot of frustration that things aren't better than they are. Now, we pro-life people would say that's true, right? We recognize that we all want things to be better. So I think since they genuinely do want things to be better, I think a lot of people have just grown impatient and are starting to see faults with the people historically, the only people historically who've been fighting against abortion. Um, Beyond the typical kind of frustration and patience, I think the pro-life movement has a legitimate, needs legitimate thinking, or rethinking on certain things. I think, and you might disagree with me on this, and that's fine. I think it's good for us to have disagreements. But as I said in the article, um, you know, I'm not saying it's good for us to have disagreements. It's good for us to talk about disagreements. But I think, a lot of people grow, impatient and frustrated when a lot of pro-life people refer to all women who get abortions or who have abortions as being victims. I would say that's just not true. The only victim, at least again, generally speaking, the only victim is the preborn baby. And I think that makes a lot of people upset, and I think rightly so. But unfortunately, a lot of the abolitionists who get upset by that, they then assume false motives on the pro-life movement as a whole. Because then they believe, well, if you believe that the women who are killing babies are are um, are victims, then you're my enemy, right? Then they think in their minds is the same kind of arguments that the pro-abortion people say as well. So I think in my mind, the pro-life movement needs to, in my mind, move away from the women who have abortions being victims thinking, and also again, I said this in the article, so I know it's controversial to many people within the pro-life movement, but I think it's 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 unhelpful that if we do believe that abortion should be illegal, if we believe that abortion is murder, but then we don't believe that women who or anybody who perform or facilitate an abortion should receive criminal charges for that. Now, of course, in various degrees depending on the case. If we believe that's wrong, well, I think that's problematic, right? Because if killing a baby is just like killing a 5-year-old person, then I think then we need to say then that people who have abortions then once abortion is illegal should be penalized for that.
Well, that was a lot. And you certainly did say something a lot of people disagree with, especially when you talked about penalties for and seeking criminal punishment for women who've undergone an abortion. I would say that view is largely opposed to about 95% of the pro-life movement in America, who says, we can't offer a helping hand one day and slap women with penalties the next. So I think that, I think you're right in that there are always going to be, and there are women today, any of us know, who have gone out to pray in front of an abortion facility or sidewalk counsel in front of an abortion facility. There are women who truly do not know what it is they're doing. There's women who are so steeped in a crisis and have a tunnel vision of the crisis of the pregnancy that they refuse to consider any other information about the development of their child, the fundamental, unique, whole human being living inside of them, who it was also created in the image of our God. But there are women who do know what abortion is and still choose abortion. I think, though, your policy prescription of, punishing women, of saying that you would be in favor of laws that criminalize women, I would deeply disagree with that, especially at a moment where you have for 50 years a country that has told women killing a child is okay, and in fact is empowerment. And because I don't know how you prescribe intent to women who seek abortions and say, well, you didn't know it was a child. You sort of knew, and you really knew. I think that becomes very legally problematic. And I think it's very difficult when you're faced with 50 years of a country that's told women and men and families that it's okay to kill their child, and then the next day say, no, you will now be put in jail for seeking abortion. I feel like it's much more of a educational moment, and almost I think it's a conversation for legislators to have, certainly, and they have every right to have that conversation. But I think that's a conversation that comes decades later, after our culture is truly changed.
I think the issue with that though is that I think it's inconsistent our with a lot of what we believe as pro-life people, in that we believe, for example, that abortion is a very similar issue as the slavery issue. A lot of people, for actually from the very beginning of the world, have been told that slavery is okay. For the first 200 years in American history, Americans have been taught, especially in the South, that black people were subhuman and that it was good to own them as slaves. And yet, when slavery, of course, to the Civil War and everything else, but when it was banned, if anybody owned slaves, they'd be charged for owning that slave, right? Even though they've been conditioned for a long time to think less of black people, the same way that for 50 years, which is even lesser than how long slavery was an institution, or at least as a legal institution, we still had punishment. So if we believe, as I do, that abortion is even worse than slavery, then I struggle with the argument that you laid out. But now, as you said, I do agree that there are different kinds of post-abortive people, and that's why I think those are different kinds of laws for people who kill others. Right? I think you have first degree, you have second degree, third degree manslaughter, and it's intent is hard to prove, but if but I think sometimes, I mean, that's true for every kind of murder, right? But that's why you have trials. That's why you have all these things. It's very hard to hear these things, but I think if we do believe, now I'm not saying that this should be happening right now, but I think once abortion has become legal completely with zero
Hmm.
exceptions, anybody who breaks the law should be punished for that. I don't think people who kill babies should
I think
be an
it's, I
exception.
mean, that's a very complicated, I mean, you brought up the issue of slavery. The question, though, is also, was anyone ever forced to have a slave? Many people, many women are forced to have abortions. And I think it's very different when you look at that. I also think it, I almost think of it as like, the campaign for seatbelts in our country and the educational campaign that went around, making seatbelts, something you had to wear. It wasn't like, I remember growing up as a child, the education campaigns, and then you would, if you were stopped without wearing a seatbelt, you would get a warning, and then the second time you would get another warning, and then the third time you would get a ticket. It was a gradual change in the culture, when the laws started to change on seatbelt wearing, for example. But and I think this is, it's a conversation. Like I said, I think it's a conversation that will be had for many years. I don't think it's a conversation for now. We aren't even close to abolishing abortion in our country. Yes, we're going to see this huge victory, with the Roe versus Wade being reversed very soon, a decision of abortion going back to the states. But now we have 50%, soon probably 75% of abortions are going to be chemical abortions. So even in the red states that will move to immediately make abortion illegal or mostly illegal, you're still going to have women getting abortion drugs from California and from New York being shipped in. We still have a society that tells her that she can't, that she's not, despite all the feminist rhetoric, that she's not strong enough, to choose both, to choose herself and the life of her child. And so I think there's a lot more of work, that we would have to do before society would ever even get to that moment, because we're not we're not close to abolishing abortion. The abortion landscape is shifting, and it's going to be taking place in a toilet bowl near you, not at the abortion facility down the street. But it's certainly not going to, what's going to happen with the Dobbs decision is certainly not going to eradicate abortion across the country. I guess, I mean, so maybe this is a whole nother, this is probably a whole nother podcast. Going back to the abolitionist discussion, what have you found to be successful, when talking with someone who says, I'm not with you anymore. I'm not pro-lifer. I hate pro-lifers. I'm an anti-abortion abolitionist. Have you found any good dialogue tips for how to have maybe a calm discussion with somebody and say, hey, this is what I struggle with when we go into states to pass laws. For example, in Oklahoma, our Life Begins at Conception law passed this year. It was signed into law that bans all abortions. There is no exceptions, only for the life of the mother, which we know is never needed. It criminalizes abortion in that the abortionist and the person who commits it, will be held criminally liable. And the abolitionists hated it, and worked against it, and told people to vote against it because it didn't put women in jail. But like, it's so frustrating when we're so close to getting laws passed, and then you see people coming in and undercutting your work and being responsible. We saw this in Indiana, for example. Laws aren't being passed to protect babies in Indiana because of the abolitionist movement. So have you started seeing some language or some conversation, some dialogue that's working to kind of say, hey, while you may disagree, can you sit back and not kill this legislation that's going to save
Yeah,
babies?
I think one of the first things, as we know as pro-life advocates, is to find common ground. Is to to remember that, hey, here's where we agree on, listing all of that out, and then moving to, okay, here's why I disagree with you. And with that comes knowledge of history, which obviously requires a lot of work. But one of the things that has been helpful is that abolitionists say that they model themselves after the original, of course, anti-slavery abolitionists, but they don't realize that especially the British abolitionists, were primarily incrementalists. So I think if we would be familiar with Wilberforce, if we're familiar with Thomas Clarkson and the Anti-Slavery Society, if we're familiar with these leaders, we will be able to show them that, wait a minute, you call yourselves abolitionist, but you're unlike your so-called abolitionist forefathers. Actually, you are condemning the people that you model yourselves after because they were incrementalists. That's a very strong point that I've noticed amongst people, at least what they say to me. They oftentimes will admit that, you know what, I got to work on that. I have to think through that. Another thing is also just being passionate and mentioning, what's happening in New York, right, or in Canada, as to, look, we all agree we should abolish abortion, but do you really think it's wrong that in the meantime, when we can't pass that we make our goal for now trying to save as many babies as possible? Is that really wrong, right? And using examples, right? And what I oftentimes say is, if I had to make a horrific choice, between all of my loved ones being killed by an evil person, of course, or being able to save some, and I know for sure that all of my loved ones would be saved if I don't save at least some of them. That would be a horrific choice. I would hate it. I would be completely bothered that I can't save all of them. But I will rejoice that at least I was able to save some of them, because that's what I would choose. And almost every single person, if not every single person, would say, as horrific as that would be, as traumatic as that would be, they'd be willing to save some. And that's how I see this issue. I want to ban all abortion. I hate abortion, obviously, but I am very willing to save some instead of leaving all to be killed.
Yeah, Samuel, I think that was a lot of good information for us to have when we're engaging in dialogue with those who may, be with us, that abortion is truly a moral evil that needs to be abolished, but may disagree with our tactic or the piece of legislation we're promoting. And I think it's important for us to try to keep an open door and conversations flowing, despite the nasty things they may say or print about some of us. It's my husband doesn't get mad about many things, but he gets mad when people take pictures of me and my children and put my children in things that they attack. My other tactic for engaging in dialogue with abolitionists, especially if they're in front of an abortion facility and kind of being intimidating towards women and not doing a prayerful approach and trying to hand women literature, I just tell them I'm Catholic, and then they start coming after me and telling me I'm going to hell. And so it distracts them from yelling at women because they can just yell at me. So I'm more than happy to get yelled at while our pro-life students are able to peacefully and calmly talk to women and try to encourage her not to go into the abortion facility. So that's my little side tactic. But I think it is important to keep the conversation going. If a friend comes out and says, I'm a abortion abolitionist, I'm no longer pro-life, don't immediately block them or just write them off. I think it's important. A lot of the points that you brought up, Samuel, today, I think were very good points. What about, Wilberforce? What about when, you can only save some? What would you do? I think that these are good things. I think these are very good things to bring up and to continue to challenge friends and family members who are kind of just figuring out where they stand. I obviously disagree with some of your positions, but I'm more than happy to continue to have that conversation and to dialogue, because I learn from those conversations as well. And I think that's important in the pro-life movement, that especially now as we enter this next phase, we are going to have deep disagreements in the pro-life movement. And we're going to continue to, we've had those, but they're going to continue. And they might actually amplify as there's now going to be 50 state battles going on. And there's going to be different strategies, different approaches. And I think we have to keep an open mind about, who it is we're really fighting against. We're not fighting against each other. We may disagree about tactics, but we're not fighting against each other. We're fighting against the evil one. And I think we need to keep that at top of our mind all the time. And to be honest with you, I get, sometimes people will ask me, well, how can you deal with mean things people say? And that's really the only answer I can give you is I try my very best to keep at the top of mind who I'm really fighting against, and to not fixate on other things that could make me get really angry and distracted from our mission of abolishing abortion. So, Samuel, thanks for coming on today. Where can folks go? What's your blog so folks can kind of follow and kind of read your thoughts? Even if they're, I think some of them are wrong. Where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to my blog at slow2write.com. They can also find me on across all social media, not except for TikTok. I'm too old for TikTok. But
Me too. Don't worry.
but yeah,
Don't worry. I can't figure it
yeah.
out.
If I ever go on TikTok, oh no. But yeah, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at slow to write as well.
So right. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to hopefully meeting you in person one day, maybe continuing our conversation. And thank you all for tuning in and hearing this conversation today. I know some of it may have been hard to hear, but I hope you heard the spirit in which this conversation was held, one of understanding, one of two people who may disagree on some things, but agree on the fundamental premise of what we're trying to do, which is save human life, to abolish abortion, to save women and children from the violence of the abortion industry, and knowing that we have a lot more work to do and we can have disagreements, but we can still work together. Thank you all.